Robby, what's in your radar?
Well, Venezuela, let's talk about the big news story of the day. U.S. forces did oust Venezuelan dictator and narco-trafficker Nicolas Maduro over the weekend, capturing him and bringing him to New York, where he will be prosecuted for his many, many crimes. It was a highly successful military operation, and whatever one thinks about regime change, U.S. interventionism, and whether we should take a more active role in policing the world, there is no denying that Maduro was a loathsome tyrant who impoverished his people, and that they are thrilled he is gone. Venezuelans and Venezuelans all over the world, but especially in Venezuela, they are cheering Maduro's downfall, and they're thanking the U.S. and President Donald Trump for taking action. Just look.
I came in this country when I was 10 years old, and ever since I was born, every single person in power of the country has abused us and abused of their power. We have been living in a dictatorship for about 20 years. So I can tell you, this feels like a breath of fresh air.
Contrary to the leftist notion that the inhabitants of poorer nations hate America and love their corrupt dictators, many of the world's oppressed people actually want the U.S. to police the world. They love America, they love freedom, and they seek the opportunity to engage in trade, capitalism, and democracy, all things that are possible only once the Maduros of the world are gone. Moreover, Venezuela is in our backyard. It's part of the Americas. It's part of our hemisphere. It's not on the other side of the world, say in the Middle East, under influences of a different religion. And that is essentially the justification we're hearing from this administration, which, after all, did promise no new wars. That was a very important part of Trump's agenda when he ran for a second term. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this isn't war. It's a law enforcement action designed to bring to justice a dangerous outlaw. Here was Rubio on Meet the Press.
This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
Have specific oil companies?
We also want to see that oil and the proceeds from it. Hold on. We want to see the oil proceeds of that country benefit the people of Venezuela. Why have 8 million people left Venezuela? 8 million, the single largest mass migration probably in modern history, left Venezuela in 2014 because all the wealth of that country was stolen to the benefit of Maduro and his cronies in the regime, but not to the benefit of people of Venezuela. You know how destabilizing 8 million migrants is?
Rubio continued making the point I just made that Venezuela is not Libya or Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan.
Venezuela looks nothing like Libya. It looks nothing like Iraq. It looks nothing like Afghanistan. It looks nothing like the Middle East other than the Iranian agents that are running through there plotting against America. Okay? These are Western countries with long traditions among their at a people-to-people and cultural level and ties to the United States. So there's nothing like that. So I think people need to stop ascribing the apples and oranges here, the apples of the Middle East to the oranges of the Western Hemisphere.
But do you...
Number two, this is about the national interest of the United States. And what I'm confident of is we are in a safer and better place because we're taking it seriously.
Now, many in the MAGA movement are backing Trump and Rubio on this. The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh writes on X, I'm as reflexively non-interventionist as anyone can possibly be, but Venezuela appears to be a resounding victory, one of the most brilliant military operations in American history. As an unapologetic American chauvinist, I want America to rule over this hemisphere and exert its power for the good of our people. Now, it's true and a valid point, Venezuela is a different situation, and the operation to apprehend Maduro was entirely successful. Many Democrats are predictably whining about Trump doing this, but of course the Biden administration put a bounty on Maduro's head. What did they think was going to happen? Kamala Harris, for example, posted a lengthy statement of very little substance, no surprise there, in which she criticized Trump for daring to actually do what Biden, I guess, only wanted done in an imaginary sense. This irony was not lost, by the way, on former New York City Mayor Eric Adams. He writes, on January 10th, 2025, the Biden and Harris administration put a $25 million bounty on Nicolas Maduro for information leading to his arrest or conviction. Public safety is not a political game. You do not label someone a narco dictator one year and then pretend he's no longer a threat the next year simply because a different president is in office. That is cynical and irresponsible. Welcome to New York, Nicholas. Now, all cheering for Maduro's downfall aside, it still remains the case that the vast majority of the American people, including conservative Trump supporters, and including myself, do not want to get bogged down in running another country. The administration needs to focus on running America, on growing the economy, on bringing down prices, cutting regulations, so that we can build more housing, on improving our education system and our healthcare system, on reducing crime. Venezuela's problems are Venezuela's problems, and while there's no reason we have to repeat our mistakes in Iraq, frankly, there's no reason we won't repeat them if we commit ground forces, try to oversee or manage the governmental transition, start handpicking successors, or telling Venezuelans that, well, they can have democracy, but only as long as it works out the way we want it to. We also must not simply plunder the wealth of the country. That would make us no better than the communists. What we want is for Venezuelans to have access to their own resources and to trade and sell them to us so that both our country and theirs can grow in prosperity and freedom. They have oil, we have money. Simple as that. That should be the vision for Venezuela, not the 51st state, not some Afghanistan-style quagmire. But for now, the end of Nicolas Maduro's reign is a defeat for socialism globally and for drug traffickers, and a victory for free people in Venezuela and around the world. Viva la libertad. And we'll be talking about this a lot later today and in the coming week, but what's your immediate reaction?
Well, I think it's important to first start with kudos to the service members for the professionalism that left no one killed or dead or seriously harmed. So that's worth noting. I also think that, it's important to point out that there are a large population, the largest in the country, of Venezuelans in Doral, Florida, who were celebrating, and these videos are not made up, right? No. There are people that have strong feelings about getting rid of this dictator. 80% of residents in Venezuela living in poverty. The economy was under collapse. Maduro was not a good guy. But that's still putting that to the side. We went from America first to America will run Venezuela in like less than a year. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the critical nature of a lot of people's feedback about what the president is doing is rightful, because the Congress people felt like they were completely skipped over in this process. Nobody knows what the plan, timeline, or the price tag is for what may look like a war. And this often leads into chaos that gets dragged out, like the examples that you cited that Rubio says are nothing to do with Venezuela when you look at Afghanistan or Iraq. But when you look at the vice president that's now in charge in Venezuela, President Trump is saying that they're on the same page. That was his first statement. And he completely skipped over the Nobel Peace Prize winner, which you would think would be the democratic next step for the country. He said she's in no position to lead. So he kind of like gave her a huge snub and looked at the vice president to possibly be the next leader. But she has been very direct about she called for the release of Maduro immediately. Right. And that's obviously going to cause friction. So I don't see how, again, going back to that price, timeline, plan, how this is going to play out smoothly when Trump tells the Washington Post over the weekend that whether U.S. troops are stationed in Venezuela depends on how Rodriguez, who is the vice president, responds to this. And her response is not ideal. Her response already is not ideal. And so when people are looking at this whole situation and wondering how it plays out next, that is a real question, because kudos to the service members for completing the mission in this way. But now that we've turned something that is a U.S. issue with him and drug trafficking into a non-war issue, even though we put boots on the ground there to get this man out of the country, what's the plan now? Right.
Well, if Maduro lacks legitimacy, Rodriguez lacks legitimacy too. The legitimate winner of the previous election was the person deemed the runner-up. That's who Machado supports taking over. Now, like you, I don't want to be overly involved in managing the country and figuring all that out. And as I've said for weeks now, skeptical of a legal justification, law enforcement that skips around Congress's need to weigh in, right? I think he should have brought it before Congress. Now, the administration is saying this is law enforcement. Biden put a bounty on his head. What did you expect? That's calling for his arrest. We went and arrested him for crimes against our country, for which he will be tried here.
And it didn't raise red flags, too, when you heard the president say...
No, it did raise red flags.
Well, no, when you heard the president say the U.S. will run Venezuela. We're like, wait, that's not what we...
That does raise red flags. It's not what Rubio's saying. It's not what other administration officials are saying.
So you think the president just spoke out of turn there?
I certainly hope so, because America first does not mean running Venezuela. Though I'm very happy for the people. The people are thrilled all over, celebrating the downfall of this truly odious man who will finally face justice.
Robby, what is on your radar?
Let's get to it. Well, with dark clouds gathering over his previously sunny re-election bid, Tim Walz has had enough. Minnesota's Democratic governor announced yesterday, he would abandon his pursuit of a third term following widespread negative publicity due to his mishandling of welfare fraud allegations. Now, he made this announcement during a press conference, which he abruptly ended without taking questions after making a hostile remark about, of course, President Trump. Take a look.
I'm proud of the way we treat our neighbors. I'm proud of the way that we welcome people to this state. I'm proud of the way that we innovate, and I'm proud of the way that we are optimists for the future. No one's taking this away from us. Not the fraudsters, certainly not this president, not on my watch. Tomorrow, I'll be back with you. I'll give you an update on America's best paid family medical leave program that is now a week into it, and at that time, I'll take all your questions. Thank you all.
Now, Walz has not been accused of personal wrongdoing, but the buck stops here, as they say. Walz was the man in charge, while fraudsters stole millions or perhaps even billions of taxpayer dollars, setting up fake charities, ransacking the medical system, and operating dubious child care services. The sheer amount of plunder has attracted national media attention in recent weeks, with even the New York Times throwing Walz under the bus. The governor's response has not reassured his critics that he is laser-focused on restoring credibility to these programs and mercilessly prosecuting the thieves. It's fine to insist, as Walz has, that the entire Somali diaspora should not be smeared for the criminal behavior of just some community members. I'm good with that. But the governor has made a habit of trying to redirect blame to other groups such as white men. Remember when Walz said coverage of the fraud story was akin to white supremacy? Let's watch.
This is what happens when your own federal government wages war against you. This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy when you hear the Vice President of the United States talk about now white people won't have to apologize for being white.
Keep in mind that the accusations against the Somalis are about proportionality, that they're responsible for a disproportionate amount of fraud, not absolute levels of crime. So it's apples to oranges. Moreover, saying that we must be colorblind with respect to the ethnicities of the fraudsters while also calling for more white men to be held accountable is totally incoherent. Unfortunately, this incoherence is broadly representative of the Walz persona. This is a man who was elevated to national prominence by Vice President Kamala Harris when she picked him to be her 2025 running mate. Walz's own clumsily worded telling, she picked him because he could, quote, code talk to white guys like himself. I hate that phrase. He saw his job as reassuring his own identity group that they could vote for a black woman for president. It's a reductive and extremely flawed notion of what makes for a relatable presidential ticket. Harris underperformed with men, particularly young men, of all racial backgrounds, not specifically white guys. Walz likes football and fixing trucks, so vote Harris Walz 2024. Come on. This is identity politics at its most vacuous. But it's not just the Walz's vibes are off. His governance in the state of Minnesota has been disastrous, even apart from the fraud scandal. Indeed, Walz has achieved a record as hostile to human liberty as virtually any other currently seated governor. That's saying something. He was, first and foremost, a COVID tyrant who zealously enforced social distancing and mask requirements, including by setting up a coronavirus snitch hotline. Citizens were encouraged to report their neighbors to the government for failing to abide by COVID rules. He also spent coronavirus relief money on pet projects and political kickbacks that were obviously outside the scope of what the money ought to have been used for. State workers' parking costs, teaching women and minority-owned businesses how to apply for state contracts, specifically those groups, and also the Minneapolis Zoo. Why not? For supporters of individual liberty, Walz's various pronouncements on policy issues were like nails on a chalkboard. He said that misinformation was not protected by the First Amendment. It is. He said socialism was just, quote, neighborliness. Nope. He said it was not a mistake to send sick COVID patients back to nursing homes. Even former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has given up that one. Come on. A year ago, Walz was seen as a potential 2028 vice presidential candidate. Candidate. Not just vice president. Maybe he'd be vice president again, but actual candidate. His decision, however, not to run for re-election, an explicit acknowledgement of the toll of the fraud scandal that it's taken on his reputation, seems like the end for Walz's political career to me. I guess at least he'll have plenty of time for those football games and fixing those trucks.
I thought that was funny because, I get that he's like supposed to be the relatable, former guy who is, teaches the kids sports. But
as a real man's man, a football-loving, truck-fixing, just guy's guy, I didn't relate to him.
Okay.
Maybe it's just me.
I think, why Kamala chose him, let's break it down. I think that you are trying to minimize a little bit about why she chose him. Now, he does have a huge background in a rural community, so that makes him relatable in a real life, right? People in rural America could understand his teaching experience. He's a public school teacher, right? Rural America can explain that. That has nothing to do with a white guy that likes trucks. He also is a former service member. I think his National Guard experience is relevant here, and people can relate to that since we have people that do serve our country, right? Or have family members that do.
Right.
And look at that as very honorable.
He exaggerated his record.
There were, and he did not give good responses to those questions. I can be the first one to admit. And then he spent, 6 different terms in Congress, as well as, his experience before this year being governor, representing a conservative district. So he did a good job with his tenure, and I don't think that you should minimize why Kamala chose him, even though in her book she said he wasn't her first choice. So, that's still up for debate. I think that it's clear that the president was going to continue to attack him, and Republicans were going to continue to attack him until Election Day. And so his response at the very most was lackluster about how long he took to respond. I do give him much more grace than you do, because during the pandemic, there were extreme levels of fraud happening across the federal government and across local governments. And so I think that it's important to know that people are being prosecuted in Minnesota, but also federally, because they took advantage of funds that were available during the pandemic when everybody was pretty much exacerbated and resources were all over the place. Yeah. And no one knew what to do. But I think as governor, he did do a lot more than absolutely nothing and not respond to this fraud. That was a drop the ball. He admit that he dropped the ball, but he talked about paid family medical leave and parental leave. He really pushed that across the aisle in Minnesota, and they have really good, I think, a standard that the rest of the country can look to. And he also did legalize recreational marijuana, which I think was a good thing.
That's the so his whole legacy is
not trash.
That is the
And so I think you shouldn't minimize it just because of this incident, even though he did drop the ball. But I think we can point to governors across the country that have a big thing that they could have handled way better. Now, this was a huge incident, but I'm just saying he didn't do absolutely nothing in his entire time in government.
The COVID snitch line.
And the snitch line, you just feel offended about that. But it's not the craziest thing in the world. I mean, if I was scared that my grandmother was going to die from you coughing on me, I might snitch on you, Robbie. I'm not going to lie.
We would not have gotten along.
We wouldn't have got along then, because I want to save my grandma and myself, and you're coughing and not wearing a mask. I'm snitching.
I ain't wearing a mask ever. No, if I had to travel and I was, for some reason, and you couldn't just stay home, and I was ill, I would wear a mask. But I will not wear a mask as a prophylactic measure because we're in part of some mass social experiment.
Robbie, what is on your radar?
Meet New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's new tenant advocate, Sia Weaver. Now, Weaver's job supposedly is to advocate for the tenants' rights, make sure they aren't being mistreated by their landlords. But because Mamdani is a democratic socialist, his appointee is not some normal person who just wants to make sure that people aren't getting ripped off. No, Weaver is a radical opponent of the concept of private property, who has implicitly advocated the collectivization of property. In other words, the state comes in and takes your property, particularly, it seems, if you're a white person. Here's what she said in a video from several years back, well before she was picked for this job.
I think the reality is that for centuries, we've really treated property as an individualized good and not a collective good. And we are going to transitioning to treating it as a collective good and towards a model of shared equity will require that we think about it differently. And it will mean that families, especially white families, but some POC families who are homeowners as well, are going to have a different relationship to property than the one that we currently have.
Yikes, a different relationship with property, their own property. My friend Brianna Wu reacts on X saying, I spent a decade working in progressive politics. They all talk like this behind the scenes. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that they were morally unfit to hold any power whatsoever. That is the sad truth. But Weaver's radical far-left agenda is perfectly welcome in the Mamdani administration. Just a few days ago, during a swearing-in ceremony, Mamdani promised to replace rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. Remember that?
We will draw this city closer together. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. If our campaign demonstrated that the people of New York yearn for solidarity, then let this government foster it. Because no matter what you eat, how you pray, or where you come from, the words that most define us are the two we all share: New Yorkers.
The warmth of collectivism hasn't worked out in North Korea or the Soviet Union. It didn't work out in Venezuela. Maybe it'll work for us. We already know the answer, of course, even if New Yorkers who voted for this do not. Take the housing issue, for example. Mamdani and Weaver think the tenants are best served by heavy-handed government regulation when we know the opposite is true. Mamdani recently toured a rental property that was in a deplorable state, trying to make the point that this squalor is what landlords subject tenants to. But of course, the reason the landlord won't pay to fix the building is that it's rent-controlled. They wouldn't be able to charge more for a nicer property, so they don't bother. Mamdani, of course, vigorously supports rent control, even though it leads to rental shortages and other problems just like that one. As the Washington Post writes, Mamdani, Weaver, and their fellow travelers might enjoy fantasizing about a collective utopia without property rights. In reality, renters are going to be left fending for themselves as they navigate ever-dilapidating housing conditions. Yes, indeed. So we're seizing people's property now, I guess, as a result of tenants' rights.
Okay, so
we're just going to nationalize all the property. We'll centralize it under the Commissar, Chairman Mamdani, and Sia Weaver. White people especially for some reason, but she said some people of color too. I guess that was when we were still using that terminology. That's like a 2018, 2020 sort of woke excessiveness thing. I don't want that person in power at all, but here we are.
Well, I think Mamdani made his choices for different positions, and we're going to have to accept them in the same way that we
who was the most radically
have accepted Trump's choices of random people that he's picked to lead positions they have no experience in. But either way,
no, she has experience. I'm not saying she doesn't have experience.
No, there's several people I'm saying that we might disagree with the choices, but I don't mind the choice. He can do whatever he wants. I think that what's first needs to be said is what's overstated, historically inaccurate. I've watched a lot of her speeches in the past, and she talks about the fact that we need to perhaps maybe have like inherently racist idea of owning property. I don't think that that is correct. Right. I think that when you understand history and you understand how the freed slaves were promised property, never given that, when you understand the Homestead Act and you understand redlining and redistricting that caused people to not have the access to certain properties, when you talk about home loans that weren't given to people of color intentionally, historically, before there were laws passed against things like that. These are all things that go into the fact that people didn't have the opportunity to have this perceived wealth across the country.
Laws preventing black people from being allowed to own property are not examples of state, or not examples of cap. That's wrong. That's the government managing the economy.
That's what I'm saying. We as a country have grown from the place of freed slavery until right now. And so a lot of people discuss the idea of how do we atone the 40 acres and a mule idea? How do you make people of color whole when they did a lot of the work on the lands and reap no benefits or no profit? And the largest driver of wealth is owning land in this country for many people. And so people have been struggling with how to rectify that for generations. But I don't think the answer is seizing land that already exists now. But she's talking about a lot of gentrification and how a lot of people of color also end up on the short end of the stick of that in those situations. So I think she and Mamdani, again, like he hired a lot of people across the board, have to come together to figure out how to reach the goal of making it, hopefully her goal is to make it more equal for people that are less fortunate or just people of color that have no access to home ownership after all these generations of being held back, and to level the playing field. But that doesn't look like taking it away from somebody.
They always level the playing field by not, but do you know what I'm saying? The people that they always steal from the people at the top to bring it down.
I don't think the word steal doesn't work, because if you talk about historically, like why 4 generations might own a property and somebody worked on it for free but was never given any rights to the property or any profit from the property, then you could see how that would set the black person's generations behind the person that owned the property that they worked on after slavery. Like, you get all of that. I know that you understand that historically, but we're not talking about that. We're here in 2025 and we're talking about how to move forward, and that doesn't look look like seizing the land from the person that now owns it, but it does look like creating opportunities for people of color to own more property. And I think that that's a noble idea to push forward, but she's going to have to figure out a better strategy than taking it away.
She wanted to take it from
she said, and also
black people too.
She said people of color. That could be everybody, Latino people, Asian people. She said the whole POC.
You owned a property in Colorado.
I still do in Colorado.
She's coming for you. She's coming for you.
But I do think that she and Mamdani, I appreciate that Mamdani within his first week has instituted some executive orders to try to hold accountable some of these slumlords that own major properties that aren't doing the work. You still cannot leave people with things like no heat or fixing items in their home.
Why they're not going to fix it? Because
no, they still should have a bare minimum. People are living in crappy conditions because people want to be cheap because it's rent control. You have a responsibility to make sure that the tenant isn't freezing in the winter, right?
I would get rid of
we
the
can
rent
say
control,
that.
and then they would.
Well, some of the companies, one of the biggest companies is filing bankruptcy right now to avoid all of the litigation that's coming down their way. And Mamdani's like, not so fast. You're about to make these people whole. Then you could go bankrupt. Yeah. And so I think that that's honorable.
I think we are not ignoring, but underplaying the radical extent of Mamdani's agenda and just how dangerous and psychotic his
President Trump likes him, so I guess we'll just see how that fares over time. Robby, what's on your radar?
I think I was missing volume, but my volume's back. Okay, let's get to it. Why do so many progressives absolutely love the idea of imprisoning their political enemies for expressing ideas they dislike or think are wrong? For example, number 8,057, yes, I made that number up, C. Mehdi Hasan, a well-known leftist commentator and founder of the progressive news site Zateo. Hasan wants to elect far-left Democrats and defeat Trump and the Republicans. No surprises there. But recently, he had some advice for Democrats on what their platform should be as they seek to take back power. They should run explicitly on a platform of prosecuting Republicans for unspecified crimes, including Elon Musk, who's not even an elected member of the government. What's his crime? Who knows? We'll figure that out later. Seriously, watch.
I said this recently to John Favreau on Twitter. I said, maybe I'm only half joking when I say this, which is the next Democratic president should run on a plan to prosecute Elon Musk. That would, they would easily go to the top of the pack. They would immediately go to the top of the polls in the Democratic race. So the first Democrat who comes out and says, my first act as president is to prosecute Elon Musk. Now people will say, oh, you're politicizing. That ship has sailed. Right, that ship has sailed. The Republicans have no grounds to bring that up, and any Democrat who brings it up, they're living in the wrong world. Right? There has to be accountability. It cannot be another 2009 in 2029.
You might be wondering what Musk has done to warrant prosecution. Well, here was the pretext that Hasan suggested.
The 2028 Democratic primaries have to showcase a group of politicians who are running for office to not just fix things, not just offer a bright new future, not just running on a change platform, but are running on a platform to prosecute and punish the people who broke the law, destroyed our country, destroyed our democratic fabric, destroyed society. Turned people against one. What we saw over Christmas with the Somali fraud nonsense, the video from this right-wing YouTuber that went viral, all these people jumping on, attacking the Somali community. That is all engineered by people like Elon Musk. The algorithm does that.
So there it is. Elon Musk owns a social media site that has allowed for the expression of news and opinions that Mehdi Hasan opposes. Lock him up. His website drew attention to allegations of Somali fraud, hate speech, misinformation, unapproved expression. This is the world progressives would have you live in, one in which you were censored for calling attention to stories that they don't want you to hear, one in which the people who provided unfettered access to alternate perspectives face prosecution. Here I was thinking free speech was a progressive value? I guess not anymore. And notice, of course, how Mehdi Hasan cites the Nick Shirley video as evidence that he can write off the entire Somali fraud story as, quote, nonsense. I'm sorry, but even if you're not entirely persuaded by Shirley's video, which, to be clear, has faced some reasonable pushback concerning the timing of his visits to the daycares, whether they'd already been closed down or whether they were under investigation, so on, you can't just say the whole story is nonsense. Even from the state government's view, they did investigate and shut down Somali-run daycares that were receiving government funding. That's on top of the healthcare and the nonprofit-related fraud, of which there are already dozens of prosecutions, mostly of Somalis. Sorry if that's inconvenient for whatever narrative you're trying to advance there, Mehdi. By the way, Mehdi is the author of a book called Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. I haven't read it. I wonder if his strategy for winning every argument is putting the other guy in prison. End of argument. Now, I'm teasing a bit. I don't actually think most normal Democrats will run on a platform of jailing everybody who spoke up against them. Hoping for one thing that they have learned, this is a strategy that will backfire. Donald Trump benefited from the presumption that Democrats were seeking a pretext to prosecute him, and that they ran on a platform of doing just that. You furnish the votes, we'll furnish the crime, that sort of thing. Made 2024 an existential election from the Republican perspective. And look, I get the Democratic perspective is that the GOP isn't constrained by any norm, so why should we be constrained? Well, I think the First Amendment is a pretty good norm, pretty good constraint. I think it benefits all of us. I think it's alarming how eager the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is to abandon it. Not a good thing.
You know,
jail Elon Musk.
Yeah, and he said half joking, so I'm just going to go with the joke part of it, and I'm just going to park that. I don't agree with him. Obviously, jailing Elon Musk on no basis besides you don't like him, or that he runs a social media site in a way that you don't, or many people don't agree with, is not enough. But I do think within his point, he was making some sense as far as like the Democratic Party is constantly looked at as the one who just ends up caving, even like holding up the government shutdown all this time. I didn't agree with the shutdown, but if you went this far just to cave, it was kind of like silly. Like Republicans kind of get in line and fall in line. Even we saw that with President Trump's ascension to his position. There were many people who didn't want him both times that he ran to be the candidate, and then he was, and then everybody just kind of fell in line like the military. And even what we talked to Cenk a little bit about, no matter what he does, there's certain people that still will make excuses for him. The same people that condemned, for example, and I don't want to go on a January 6th rampage, but the people that condemned it are now like on his side and allowing what the administration says to stand as true. And so I think that Democrats could learn a bit about standing up to President Trump, equaling those tactics of what Governor Gavin Newsom is doing, not backing down, pushing back. So that part of what Mehdi said, I think, is firm. The other part about prosecuting people, I think Democrats learned a lesson that continuing to prosecute President Trump himself not only rallied the base, but it caused them to lose elections afterwards. And a lot of the American public saw the economy tanking as they continued to pursue Trump, and that didn't sit well. And so that's not a winning message ever again.
Well, and the part of it I so objected to was not saying that we should prosecute. If crimes were committed, people should be prosecuted. It was some big scandal when Donald Trump said lock her up about Hillary Clinton. I guess it's not a scandal anymore since that's what Mehdi's saying. But that was for a specific thing, right? This is now saying, well, let's find some reason. And the reason proposed is really what bothers me, which is that X, the social media site owned by Elon Musk, has been a place where news stories are being commented on in a way that does not meet the progressive satisfaction. Isn't that's what's really alarming to me? Not that if he said we're going to investigate the contracts for whatever government things that Elon got or whatever, like, okay, that's going to get investigated. Well, but it was about speech.
And I think sometimes people say things on the campaign trail that they know will rally up the base that's really tired of constantly getting bulldozed by the Trump administration. So saying something like lock Elon Musk up or lock her up, even in the case of Hillary, may rally some people. So that's Mehdi's idea. You don't go forward through your entire presidency.
I thought progressives were
trying to
mad
lock people up.
that Trump and the FCC have made threatening comments about what kind of programming ABC can have and so on and so forth, and late night, that whole thing. But now we should put in prison the owner of a social media site.
Well, you said that in your radar, you said that you don't think most Democrats think that. Mehdi Hasan was obviously saying something outrageous.
I hope most Democrats don't listen to what progressives want them to do, because what progressives want them to do is dangerous and illiberal. That's really what.
And also on the Somali point, I think that two things don't need to be mutually exclusive. Like, you can bring up how much fraud happened in Minnesota and point out how bad it was, but you also know that Elon Musk is fueling a lot of this vitriol that's targeting an entire ethnic group, and that's not acceptable. And so when he is running a platform and can easily amplify his own negative thoughts, as well as the people who support his negative thoughts, because we don't know what's going on in the algorithm and how he propels certain voices. And you've seen the negativity propelled about Minnesota. While some accusations may be true,
that's not a crime.
It's not a crime.
Negativity.
I know, but as we're watching that, I'm just saying he probably wants Elon Musk to do better. So I agree with the points outside of going as far as trying to lock Elon Musk up. I agree that he is part of the problem when it comes to looking at an entire ethnic group and judging them based off the actions of a few within that group.
Fair enough.